Hello, I'm Sally Pointer. Today I'm looking at another small tool from prehistory. This is one that's been associated with the idea of making nets, but it is a little bit different from some of the forms you may be more used to. Nets and netting shuttles have been with us for a very, very long time. We could trace them back into the Paleolithic. And when I'm making nets today, I'll very often use a very simple style of shuttle, just a stick with space for the yarn. This is a very lovely bone one, which is now sadly cracked at the end, that Gareth made me a few years ago. Love this tool, even with a broken end it's fine. I'll probably trim that back just to a Y end for tidiness at some point. You do see those in some historical styles. This is a Victorian example, very beautiful, fine bone netting shuttle that would have been used for fancy work. And of course there are the more modern styles, the sort of things you're more likely to see today if you're buying netting shuttles. Annoyingly, I couldn't find a real one to wave at you in this bit of the video, but I'll patch a picture in. Today's video though is about something very, very different. It's about a style of shuttle that is really only found in Europe in the Neolithic. That's a very different shape to the netting shuttles that I've just shown you. This video is mostly about what it's like to use, but I am going to start with how I made this one. I haven't used accurate techniques in the making of this because I really just wanted to belt the shape out so I could get to the fun part. So we're going to make one of these very quickly using modern tools, and then we're going to have a go with it, see how it is compared to using other shuttles. There are a number of netting shuttles from the European Neolithic and Bronze Age that are very different to the ones we have today. So this particular paper is about a netting needle from a Hungarian Bronze Age site. And just look at that. It's a really unusual shape to today's eyes. This particular one is in Antler. It's about 7.5 centimetres down its length. It's also been decorated with spots, has an eye through the side there, and it's quite gently curved. It's made use of an antler tine that's just been trimmed to shape, decorated, and clearly works very well. Here's another example. This is in a paper by Karina Groma. This is an example from one of the Swiss Neolithic lake dwelling sites. It's very, very similar to the Hungarian example. It's curved. I'm not sure if this one's bone or antler. I think both are known. There's quite a few of these known. It has a little protrusion, has an eye through it, and these have been replicated and tested by quite a few different researchers. I haven't got one in my own collection though, so I'm going to have a go at making one. For me, often the first stage in making a replica is to print things out life size. So this is the research image. It's been scaled to be exactly the right size. And now I've come out to my stash of antler and I need to match a little bit to the drawing. So obviously something like that is way too big. I have got some offcuts. Actually, these are pretty big as well. I'll probably get a couple out of this. That's definitely a possibility. Plenty of width of material there to trim down. Plenty of thickness. Spongy at the end still, should be nice and solid there. That's looking very promising. That would be a little bit too thick. Let's have a look. That could be another potentially good one. A little bit of a curve. Oh, there. Let's have a look. This one has grabbed my eye, if I can get to it. Right, let's have a look at that. Right, move the great big beastie. How about that one? It's a funny little bit of antler, this. It's got some damage to the tip, which I think happened in life. These are all shed antlers, so no deer have been harmed by them. These are collected after they shed every year. That's a possibility as well. Right, I'm going to put by this piece, and this piece. I might end up with several netting needles. That wouldn't be a terrible thing. I also am going to want to make a flat needle to use as a gauge. let's get these into the workshop, slice them up, see what we end up with. In due course, I want to make some of these using appropriate early tools, so things like flint flakes. But for my first proof of concept, I just want this done quite fast. So I've extremely roughly and very slightly larger than I need sketched out the shape onto the antler using a Sharpie. I'm going to take this into the workshop, and I'm probably going to use a Dremel with a saw blade just to very, very quickly rough out the shape. Then we can have a look at the quality of the antler inside, and I can decide whether I'm going to finish it with flint tools or whether I'm going to use modern files and rasps to do it. It might sound like cheating, but sometimes you learn an awful lot just by belting out a version very quickly, so you can get a feel for the material, feel for the shapes, and that helps stand in a little bit for the fact that the people who made these originally had masses of practice with the tools that they chose to use, and today we're often using them, well, perhaps with not as much practice, and it's not a bad idea just to get your hand in and see how things go. So this is the tool I'm going to try for this first bit. I'm not actually going to film this section because it's about to get very messy, very dusty, very, very noisy. Really important when you work with antler that you keep from breathing in the dust. So I'm going to put on a dust mask and goggles. If you work the antler wet, you will minimise the dust, but for this quick version, I'm going for fast. So the power tools are go. All right, very first rough out done. It's not perfect. I've got the rough shape done, but there probably should have been a little bit more of a slope just there. But I've got plenty of material left, so I'm going to go at it now with some rasps. So you could use hand files, but I'm going to use the Dremel attachment just because I am in a serious rush to have a quick go with this. Refine the shape a little bit, then I'm going to put the hole through, then I'll finish refining it. That's usually the best bet with anything needle-like, because if it goes wrong, it always goes wrong when you put the hole in. So best not to do too much work before we get to that stage. Well, so far so good. We're still a little big, but that's absolutely fine. It's always better to work these things down a bit at a time. Shape is improving. I've already learned a huge amount. This quick, fairly rough and ready approach using fast tools has shown me where the soft parts in the antler are going to sit for this particular tool, where the hard parts are, where it's easy to overcut or undercut. My next job is to drill a hole. I have set my Dremel up with a drill bit with a sort of self-pilot hole end. Yeah, I think I might have to put this one in a vise to get this to line up. This is where it could all go horribly wrong. So I put some leather into the jaws of the vise, and that's fairly secure. What I'm going to do with both hands in a second is, I think, go in from this direction and hope for the best. And it's worked. Hooray! Okay, so that's the drill coming out. I did switch it off first. And that looks as if we've got a fairly even hole. So just release the vise. Let's have a little look at it. Okay. That's not too uneven. It's not a million miles from the locations in the original. I'm just going to refine this down now and we'll give it polish. I also need to make a flat needle, really. There's quite a lot of these known archaeologically, and one will make a really good pair with this as the gauge stick. I'm going to want to make it no narrower than this part so that they pass through, but mostly I'm just going to see what the bit of antler that's left over lends itself to. Right, one more go with the sanding wheel, and this should be ready for my first attempt with this type of needle. This is the piece of antler that was left over from making this, so I'm just going to take a slice off the end here and we're going to turn that into the gauge stick. Exactly the same process. I'm going to rough this out with power tools. For this particular set, that is absolutely fine. I'm going to learn a lot from doing it, and then when I make more, I can use period appropriate tools and refine my understanding. For now, quick is the way. Well, we're very, very nearly there. We have got a not exact, but fairly closely proportioned netting needle. I don't think I'm going to decorate this because this is my quick and dirty version. I'll save the decorations for the nice one. We have a gauge stick, which is pretty much just the size that the antler wanted to be. There is a slight curve to it. I don't think that's going to make any difference, but if it does, if I soak this for 2 or 3 days, then clamp it, let it dry out, the antler will straighten. What I'm going to do now is go over these with some very fine sandpaper, because antler really does come up beautifully with a bit of a polish. Then we'll rub a drop of oil into it, and then the next thing to do is try it. Having made the tools, we're now at the main point of the video, which is to try them out. So the gauge stick, I've just tied a piece of cordage to the end so that I can drop it on my wrist, and that means that I can put it down at a moment's notice, I can pick it up at a moment's notice. I'm not going to lose it easily, and that just makes that a little easier to work with. Now the netting shuttle itself, we haven't polished it to a high gloss because that will happen very naturally in the hands. I've had a little bit of a practice, and I'm making the cordage as I go for this project. This is stinging nettle that I'm working with, and this is some of the fibre that I collect every summer. And if you've watched my minimum effort stinging nettle video, this is the raw fibre from that. So I've picked the nettles, I've split them, I've peeled the green bark which contains the fibres away from the pith, and then I just hang them up to dry. Now normally for my minimal effort stuff, I will then rub this between my palms to soften it. For this cordage I haven't actually done that, you can see the bits already falling off. I've just been making the cordage with the raw and very crunchy nettles. I'm not going to go into cordage in a lot of detail here because I've got so many videos that already do this, but a quick refresher. For this I'm using a reverse twist method. You twist away, you cross towards you, you twist away, you cross towards you. And this fibre is dry, it's crunchy, and you can probably see the bits falling onto my trousers as I work. That means this cord is quite stiff at this stage. So what I'm doing as I finish a length, and you'll notice I've left the netting shuttle on the cord, working about an arm's length, coiling it up, and then I'm rubbing it briskly between my palms. Can you see how much is coming off? That's the bark, that's all the gummy bits of the fibre, and as we do that, it's softening and it's becoming cleaner. Eventually, you can get really, really clean, finished fibres this way. But for my purposes, I just need it soft enough to be flexible, because one of the things I did observe when I gave this a first try is if it's too crunchy, the knots are hard to form. Right, let me just move that nettle off my nap, give myself a dust, and we'll try this out. So what I have found is that if I pull this down so that the frilly end, the bit that we're going to add fibre onto later, is at the furthest end of the needle, and then just wrap the spare bit around to give myself a working length of, I don't know, half an arm's length. I know it's quite hard to see with the camera in this position. Now that seems to be plenty to just make things movable, make things easy to work with. All I'm doing with this bit of netting is a setup row. I've got another video on this, which is the making a rectangular net video. It's just a leapfrogging method where I'm going to loop that up, make a knot, loop it down, make a knot, loop it up, make a knot, and that will become the top row of a net, which I can then work into further. This is very much a test piece. I'm not too worried what it comes out like, but what I want to do is get a feel for what this is like in the hand. So, bringing the gauge stick into play. The cord is going to come over the gauge stick. I'm going to use the needle to pull this up, get gauge. And there are a couple of different ways of forming a netting stitch. Usually when I teach, I break it down into 2 sections. I'll do the first stitch that way. So I'm going to use my thumb just to make sure that doesn't escape. Use the netting shuttle to pass the cord through, and that shape, even though it's lumpy bumpy, goes through there without any difficulty at all. That creates a loop which keeps trying to fall on the other side. Take the shuttle back down through the loop, and I've found so far that the fatter end works very neatly for that. And then just pull up until you get a sheet bend. So far so good. Then to make the next one, just take the gauge stick out, flip this over because we're leapfrogging down for this setup row. Same thing again. Yarn is going to come over the gauge stick, use the pointy end to go up through, get gauge. This time I'll do it the way that a lot of people are taught, and that's to throw the yarn over to the left. This time, when you go behind both legs of the stitch, you've already gone through the loop. Same thing happens though, pull up nice and steadily, and you should get a sheet bend. Now, actually I think this is just done one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. One of the things that we find with the Swiss Neolithic lake villages is that there's often a lot of netting found that's got what I would think of as a lazy knot. It's as if they've started a sheet bend, but it's slipped. And that's just done it. There's been a lot of debate about whether that's deliberate, whether people are just tying more or less an overhand knot, or whether it is a regional variation. Do you know what? I have got a sneaking suspicion that it's because if you're working with freshly made plant bast cordage, in this case it's nettle, but there's a lot of lime bast and willow bast cordage known from the area, it takes a while to soften up. Stiff cordage is much more likely to jump slightly when you make your knot. And there's no technical reason why you'd want a movable knot on a net. It means the mesh opens out. It's more likely to let things out of the way. So there's always been this debate, is this a regional variation, or is it just that people being a bit sloppy about making their nets? And I'm just wondering whether it's neither, whether it's just a function. See, that one worked absolutely fine. Whether it's just a function of working with freshly made plant fibre cordage that hasn't been really softened up in advance. Because if you think about it, why would you? If you're making clothing, you want things very, very soft. So it would make a lot of sense to work with very well prepared fibres that are lovely and soft right from the start. Things like a net. Oh, and I've just broken my thread. Oh well, not to worry. Things like a net, you want to be really, really robust and not break in the bad places. So using cordage that will soften up as you go is quite logical. All I need to do here, because that knot actually formed fine, is knot a fresh piece on. I'm not going to be too precious about it. As long as your knots hold, it'll be absolutely fine in the end. So, not the neatest thing in the world. When I get to the end of the net, if I feel inclined, I can go round and I can tidy up those little wispy bits. Sometimes it helps if you've got enough to put a little extra knot in. Right, that is not the world's tidiest join. This is very much an experimental bit of net though, it doesn't matter. Right, so I've just about reached the end of my comfortable working distance on this, so all I need to do is just keep unwinding as I go. I'm going to do one more knot and then we'll have a look at what you do when you run out completely. So nice pointy end, makes it very easy to work through. Thumb goes on. I'm going to do this one the other way around. I do use both methods fairly interchangeably. At the end of the day, use whichever knot works best for you. There is no string police. No one's going to leap out and tell you you're doing it wrong as long as it works. So this is something that I can keep adding to, and I will keep adding to it. When I've made a piece that's long enough to work with, then I'll start working in this direction. So I would come, actually let's flip it down so that the working end is coming out of the bottom. I would come down to that for my next knot, and then that for my next one underneath. And I can start working back and forth in a flat manner. Okay, back to the tool. The tool is the important bit in this video. So when we get to the end, and I've used up as much as I can comfortably wind off, you don't even have to take the needle off the cord. Just pull it down so it's out of the way. Get back to the frilly ends if you need to, and wind a little twist or two to get to the working area, and then I can carry on making cordage in the usual manner. What I'll do next is I'll lay a piece across to fatten this up, and I'll continue twisting. When I've done an arm's length, I'll rub it in my palms, and you can see that dust. The more you're working with things like this, and even with this, once I've done a section before I start the next row, all that dust falling off, and you don't really want to breathe that, try and do this in a well-ventilated spot, is all the surplus barky material from the nettles flaking away. Right, okay, I don't want to go on for too long because these videos tend to end up with me just chatting to you, and we don't get anywhere. So we have got a very simple gauge stick. Needles like this, or flat sticks like this, have been found from the Paleolithic onwards. There's some really lovely ones in the Museum of Copenhagen, the National Museum of Denmark. Sometimes they're decorated. Sometimes this hole at the end has broken away and it looks as if it may have been a notch, could have been a notch at both ends, but they're often interpreted as either netting needles in their own right, but I think they work particularly well as gauge sticks. Once we've got gauge sticks, they're with us pretty much forever. That works brilliantly. This shape of needle does seem to be very specific to the Neolithic in Europe. It's very unusual when you compare it to the netting shuttles that we have today. But you know what? It really, really works. It's very comfortable in the hands. Yeah, it really, really sits in well in the fingers. It works equally well being used pointy end first or slightly blunter end first. Both my methods of making the sheep bend knot are equally effective with this. We've also observed that it is just possible that a slightly unusual knotting style that's observed at the Swiss lake villages in the Neolithic might be a function of working with slightly stiff, freshly made cordage. Jury's out on that. It's only just something that I've observed in practice, but we do see it over and over and over again. That, I think, is sufficient for today's video. I hope if you're having a go at netting that you will consider using a wide variety of tool styles to do it, because archaeology and history do show us an evolution of these ideas, and there are regional variations, and it's a huge amount of fun to work with something that you can trace back to a particular time and place. And it's always a joy to work with nettles, one of my very favourite fibres. I am going to make these again with flint tools, and I'll do that by soaking the antler, scraping, and then boring a hole through. This particular version was deliberately done very quickly using modern tools, just so that I could get to trying it out. I'm really happy with it. I'm looking forward to sharing it with people at workshops and events over the summer. But for now, happy crafting, happy hedge bothering, and I'll see you again in more videos in the not too distant future. Bye for now.